She said, if you don't come and see me, I will divorce you. And I said, it's do or die for me in my work. If I can succeed, I will be exactly the man you wanted me to be. And I could not accept the ultimatum. And so that was the end of it.
In Argentina, Jean began to realize something was wrong with her. She became disoriented and sent Oleg rambling letters claiming her co-workers were against her. In February, the exhausted actress returned to Los Angeles and filed for divorce. Her marriage had finally ended after a decade of heartache and tension. But the greatest nightmare of Jean Tierney's life was just beginning. By 1952, Jean Tierney was divorced, unhappy, and behaving in strange ways that frightened her. She threw herself into work, hoping to find a cure by being busy. Between films, she traveled with her mother and daughter Christina to Paris, where the actress met the seductive Muslim prince, Ali Khan. The ex-husband of Rita Hayworth, he was the son of one of the world's richest monarchs, the Aga Khan, and a notorious bachelor.
She felt that he was very exciting. He knew the right places to go. She didn't want a mundane life that the rest of us live.
Jean embarked on a whirlwind romance. For her, Ali Khan was a means of escape from her divorce, from the tragedy of Daria, and her own growing mental stress.
I begged her not to take it seriously because I said, Ali Khan does not represent a good risk for you. Why don't you go and get yourself some nice guy from Connecticut? Because you're always involved with these characters, me included, that are not the prototype that you and your family really wanted.
In public, Jean seemed one of the world's most exciting women. But by 1954, her mind was drifting. She had difficulty remembering lines. More stress came from Ali's father, the Aga Khan, who publicly opposed their rumored plans of marriage. Ali did propose to Jean, but his offer came with a painful ultimatum.
He wanted her to come to his country and accept his religion and politics and not incorporate her family. And the family was everything to Jean. She was torn, just absolutely torn.
The many pressures were too much. As Jean worked on the lavish drama The Egyptian, her mind continued to deteriorate.
She would go in and out of these periods. She said, I know when I'm slipping. And she said, it's just like falling down a manhole and not having anything to grab onto.
By the time Jean made The Left Hand of God with Humphrey Bogart, she was near collapse. Her romance with Ali Khan was over, and she seemed totally helpless.
It's been a long time since I went walking out with a pretty girl.
Do you always startle people like that, Father?
Why?
One doesn't think of priests ever walking out with girls.
Between takes, they looked for her, and we spotted her sitting under a tree with her head kind of in her lap, lost to everything. Humphrey Bogart was a help to Jean. He fed her lines. He just led her along like a little child.
You're not the only one who has something to atone for. I have too.
You?
I fell in love with a priest.
Audiences had no idea Jean was ill, but at age 34, her fragile world finally shattered. While rehearsing for a television appearance, she collapsed and withdrew from the program. The terrified actress locked herself in her mother's New York apartment, where she slept and hallucinated.
She would go in a corner, and she often looked at the portrait of my sister. She would stare at that painting and she would cry. She'd weep.
Barely able to function, Jean was taken by family members to the Harkness Pavilion in New York, where she reluctantly agreed to electric shock treatment.
She was absolutely paralyzed with fear. They would strap her down, and they would give her these shocks, no preparation, and then boom, and you know, that just shattered the brain. And then she would wake up, and she had no memory.
Jean's misery deepened as she checked into the Institute for Living at Hartford, Connecticut. She spent her first night screaming in a locked room that seemed to her a cell. 19 more shock treatments increased her memory loss. The dazed patient was released to her mother's New York apartment where daughter Christina was living. One day, Jean opened a window and numbly stepped out onto the ledge of the 14th floor.
I came home from school and I saw a big crowd on the street, and I looked up with a friend of mine. Her name was Rodina, and Rodina said, look, there's somebody up there with their nightgown on. And I realized it was my mother. I thought my mother was going to jump off.
After a tense 20 minutes, Jean stepped back inside.
She told me later, she said, thank God, she said, you know, I don't want to kill myself. I don't want to kill myself.
Police arrived and Jean was taken to her third mental hospital. But the Menninger Clinic in Topeka, Kansas would be different. New medications helped. She explored her life's many tragedies in therapy, and for the first time, she saw an escape from her endless ordeal.
They gave her a sense of respect, and they helped her understand that it was not such a horrible thing to be sick and to have mental illness.
In 1958, Jean was released. She vacationed in Aspen, Colorado, and during her stay, she met a charismatic oil executive named Howard Lee. 3 months later, they were discussing marriage.
I think it was sort of love at first sight. Howard didn't care that my mother had been sick.
Howard Lee was soft-spoken and gentle with her, and that's what she needed.
A hopeful Jean returned to Los Angeles, but celebrations were premature. Overwhelmed by the attention of friends and the press, she suffered an emotional relapse and returned to Menninger on Christmas Day. After months of treatment, doctors encouraged her to try working part-time near the hospital. She agreed and took a job as a saleswoman in a Topeka, Kansas dress store.
People were very surprised to have Jean Tierney as a salesgirl, but she enjoyed it, and it made her realize that she could go out and do things again. And when the press interviewed her, she was very open. At that time, it was really very brave of her because most people didn't come out and talk about things like that.
In 1959, days before her 39th birthday, Jean was released from Menninger. With Howard Lee at her side, she felt confident and was eager to return to the screen. But she wondered, would anyone in Hollywood want her back? 1960 brought poignant reminders of Jean Tierney's past. In May, Prince Ali Khan was killed in a sports car crash. In November, John F. Kennedy became president. And in December, Oleg Cassini was named designer of Jacqueline Kennedy's wardrobe. The year also brought great joy when on July 11th, at age 39, Jean married Howard Lee. A year later, they looked forward to the birth of a child. But once again, the expectant mother faced a crushing loss when she suffered a miscarriage. Now more than ever, Jean hoped to return to acting. And she was thrilled when her Laura director, Otto Preminger, gave her a role as a Washington hostess in the all-star drama Advise and Consent. But the challenge of acting, which she had once loved, soon became a stressful ordeal.
She would really get frightened, and she got this sensation of having a dried mouth. It was fear. Mother was never really the same after she'd been in the institutions.
After filming, she joined the cast and her husband for lunch at the White House. She was seated next to the president, her former love, Jack Kennedy.
She and Jack talked about old times, and she said to him that she was happily married now, and she had a husband, and when she went crazy, he still loved her.
In 1964, at age 43, Jean made her final feature film appearance in the Anne Margaret musical, The Pleasure Seekers. But her role as Brian Keith's jealous wife was little more than a cameo.